everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is the first webinar that NYLC has hosted on early childhood education, and we're really excited for you all to join us today. I'd like to introduce today's presenters, Vicki Lake and Ethel Jones. They're going to explain more about their history, but they just published a really great book, Service Learning in the Pre-K Classroom, and so we're hoping that this can be a guide for a lot of people who work with younger students and how to make service learning still rigorous and tied to the content standards, but meaningful for the students as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Vicki and Ethel, and if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, myself and Marcus Penny from NYLC will be answering all your questions through the chat box. So I hope you enjoy, and Vicki and Ethel, take it away.
Hi, and my name's Ethel Jones. I'm faculty at the Florida State University, and my colleague Vicki was here with me up until a couple of years ago, and she moved on to Oklahoma. And we've been working in the area of early childhood service learning probably for about 8 years ago. And as Lana said, this is kind of a historic moment, I think, to have an early childhood focus as a webinar. And when we started about 8 years ago, there really wasn't a whole lot of stuff out there for early childhood, and we really had to try and piece it together and try and make it fit for the pre-K-3 age group. Vicki?
Hi everyone, I'm Vicki Lake and I'm at the University of Oklahoma. Today when Ethel and I refer to the projects that we've done and the projects that are in the book, all of those took place with our students at Florida State. We're excited to say that the Early Childhood Program at FSU is the model service learning teacher education program in the state of Florida, and we've really, well, we and now Ethel have really worked hard to make it so. So we will take your questions throughout via the chat box, and we hope to make it as interactive as we can, and at the end we'll even entertain more questions. So sit back and enjoy.
And you'll notice on the page we do have, you can follow us on Twitter, you can visit our Facebook page, and also we've put a link there to the Free Spirit Press, and I want to acknowledge their support in helping us put the book together that just came out this year. Thanks also to Lana Peterson and Marcus at NYLC for putting on this webinar this afternoon. And just to give you an overview of what's ahead for the next hour or so, first of all, we'll talk about what is service learning and why we want to do service learning with young children. And as I said, about 8 years ago, looking at service learning, we and most of my colleagues in early childhood would think of it as something you do with middle schoolers, high school, college students, and so on. And then it was really not something we would think about in early childhood. And so we want to think about what's the benefit of doing it with young children, and children who we typically think of as being egocentric and really just thinking about themselves most of the time and not about what they can do for others. And then we're going to look at how we go about doing service learning with young children, including resources and lesson plans, and then we'll try and wrap up with some questions. And by the way, when we're talking about service learning in early childhood, we're thinking about the pre-K to third grade age range. That's really the age range we've been working with. So we'd like to start off by giving you all a chance to use the chat box and tell us who you are and if you have any experience in early childhood. And while you're doing that, I'm going to share with you one of the projects that one of our students did here at Florida State. And in the slide there, you can see 4 photographs taken from at one of the schools here in Tallahassee. And you can see some kindergartners busy collecting trash. And we chose this slide because it's an example of how easy and simple it is to include a service project into the kindergarten classroom. What you see there is just one small piece of the project where the students were given a trash bag, they got some gloves, and they went out to the schoolyard and they picked up some trash. But it has actually included all of the elements of all of the pieces of service learning, including the planning, the reflection, the documentation, and celebration. So a lot of the work around this project has gone on in the classroom, including discussions about things we can do to improve the school environment, our immediate environment, and why that would benefit the school community. And then they planned a day of action, and they even had some mathematics thrown in where they estimated the different types and amounts of trash they'd find. And then on the day they go out and collect the trash, and then the follow-up in the classroom then is where they get to think about or reflecting on the experience by sorting the trash, graphing, talking about the benefit for the community and so on. And so they were able to include all areas of the curriculum, including science, math, and even language arts. For the more capable students, they would probably write a sentence or two about the experience. Others might dictate a sentence to the teacher. And in this case, they even followed up with a celebration that involved creating something really yummy, a dirt dessert pie, and that was was used as a celebration wrap-up for the event.
So this is the same. Oops, let me make myself larger. So this is the same slide, and we really appreciate you introducing yourself. We noticed that there are many teacher educators that are joining us today, and a few teachers of young children. So we have everything from preschool focus to those interested in K-12 resources, and probably more specifically, most of you are looking for pre-K primary, which is great since you're in the right place. So as you continue to tell us a little bit about yourself, so we know where to, the purpose is so we know where to stress, put more emphasis in the slides. We have 48 slides, which we know is a lot, but we wanted to kind of tailor it to those of you who had joined us today. So we'll probably put a little more emphasis now on the teacher education part than now that we know that there are so many of you joining us. So as you continue, I just want to talk a little bit more or share another project that our students did. And this was at more of a rural school, and the students noticed on their way to school that owls or animals were being hit a lot. So they brought it to their teacher's attention, and then they researched it. They wanted to find out why are so many animals, specifically owls is what they saw, were being killed. And so that turned into a whole lesson on conservation, and they really looked at this school is when one of the building booms in Tallahassee. So as the trees and the natural environment went away, then the owls were looking, they just don't have a home. So what you're seeing here are pictures of the advocacy piece, but then their service project was also to plant trees and to really get with the community to plant trees. So this is kindergarten, and we see how they really understand looking for food. Owls are getting struck by a car. They're talking about how people are cutting down resources, and the owls don't have places to go. They're looking at, one tree can be a home for many, many owls. And the project went on all year because they really focused on it in the fall, and then this tree planting went on the entire year. It was really a terrific service program. So here we see the owl being scared, and the madman with the saw and very tall hat is cutting it down. So a real connection of advocacy and direct service with the planting of the trees, and a real connection of caring for your community and also academic standards.
All right, thanks, Vicki. So we're going to talk a little bit about what service learning is and what service learning is in the context of early childhood. And as I said, several years ago, Vicki and I attended a workshop by Katzenberger Kay, and we were excited by the information, and he had a little bit kind of concern about how we're going to apply this in early childhood classrooms. And what we discovered, though, over the course of time was that a lot of our students, a lot of our colleagues in the classrooms, they were already doing some of this, and they were already doing service learning, and it really matched well with the elements of best practices in early childhood. So for service learning, it's a proven instructional approach, and it's known to benefit students of all ages. And now we can actually include early childhood when we talk about all ages. We define it also as a meaningful teaching strategy that blends community service with academic learning. And in our text and in our work and in working with students, we do try to emphasize this piece, that it really enhances the content, and it helps students to develop a deeper understanding or a deeper meaning of the content. I think this is important in the current climate when there's so much emphasis on academic learning, that it's not an add-on, but it really strengthens the content in the classroom. And then the third piece is that it's a reflection activity that enriches the learning experience, and we can include civic responsibility, and at the same time it strengthens community. So it's really adding that sort of almost like a social context piece to the learning. So we use these sort of three key points in defining what we mean by service learning, and we see it as a way to make the learning for young children more meaningful, which is always a struggle when we're just for example, in a second grade class, when we're simply teaching from the district curriculum or from a textbook. The challenge is how do we make that meaningful for the students? And we found that through service learning, this is one approach that can work. We also try to address the service learning standards that were developed by the National Youth Leadership Council that have defined these standards for quality practice. And on your slide there, we've listed the 8. I'm not going to read through all of them, but one of them is that it needs to be meaningful and personally relevant. And in the example, 2 examples that we shared with you, clearly these were meaningful projects for the students. It was something in their backyard. And we also saw the links to the curriculum, reflection, diversity, youth voices, partnership, progress monitoring, and duration and intensity. And just to comment on the last one, the duration and intensity, it really doesn't have to be something that has to last all semester long. It can be a short amount of time each day, or it can last several days. It really depends on the nature of the project. And we also want to emphasize that these standards do look different when you're dealing with young children. How we approach the reflection, how we approach the links to the curriculum is going to differ a little bit with young children. And especially, and Vicki will talk a little bit more about this later on when we're talking about the types of service you would want to do with preschoolers, for example. They're really going to get a lot more benefit from direct projects. And the partnerships, this is something initially we struggled with when we talked about community needs and how do we define community. And we ended up with thinking about community in terms of something closer to the students. So the community for young children is your classroom, your school, your neighborhood. Really, they don't want to be thinking of community as something, the other side of the country or the rainforest or something like that. It really helps if it's something that they can relate to. And then the four main types of service learning that you'll see are the direct service. This is the service that's face-to-face, that it includes immediate and direct feedback. And then indirect service to the community with no immediate or direct feedback. The example with the campus cleanup that the kids did when they were collecting trash, that would be an example of indirect service. It's a service to the community, but they don't actually see the immediate feedback. And then the third type is research, and then the fourth one is advocacy, where you're educating others about topics of public interest. A lot of the projects that our students do tend to be more direct than indirect service, and occasionally they'll be doing some advocacy, but most of them. So, for example, projects that would be like letters to troops or letters to farmers might be is an example of indirect service. But there are ways you can make that service, make that indirect service more meaningful and actually turn it into direct service. One example we include in the text is where after writing letters to troops overseas, you might invite a service a member of the armed services into the classroom to talk to the students and to tell them about the impact it had on him or his family and so on. And then letters to government officials would be an example of advocacy where the children respond to a local need or some concern, and then they write a letter to maybe local officials or state officials. So let us pause right there, please, so we can hear from all of you. And if you're looking at this slide, we have the four types of service learning: direct, indirect, advocacy, and research. And if you could place a check mark next to the type that you use the most often in your particular program. I know some of you are not working in the classroom, but maybe if you can put a check for the as it relates to the people you work with. Okay, I can see a direct. And I see the only research one out there, and obviously it makes sense because the direct and indirect and the advocacy are probably going to be more meaningful for young kids. And while you're finishing up putting your check marks there, one of the examples we've used in the text is a series of lessons that had kids painting flower pots. So we call it Sunshine in a Pot, and they'd either take them to the hospital or some needy people, or they do something for someone else. And you know, if they just engage in the activity in the classroom, they prepare the card or they prepare the flower pot and they plant the seeds and they grow the flowers. And then that's one type of service that would be indirect, and then have someone else deliver them. But as you'll see in this next slide, these are the preschoolers. We don't have that slide; it's gone. Oh, there we go. These preschoolers here, you can see them delivering their little piece of sunshine in the park to an individual here, and this is what makes the service direct in this case. Back to the question of does service learning really work? And I'm sure you're all familiar with this pyramid or this triangle, and where it talks about the retention rate of these different levels. And the learning methods employed in service learning maximize students' retention rate of material, and because it really targets the learning at the bottom of that triangle. It's practice by doing, and it's teaching others. It's really applying what they know, and that's how we keep strengthening the early childhood curriculum, because it's really engaging the students in a meaningful activity that really puts them in the situation where they have to reflect on the meaning of the work they've done. And so that's why it really is a powerful approach in early childhood, and it really does reflect best practices in early childhood and developmentally appropriate practices.
So as Isel said, a lot of our students, especially at the beginning when we were sort of 1 week ahead of them in the knowledge and process of service learning, they did indirect service. And as we collected data each semester, we began to realize and look at what was the effect of service learning on the children and on our pre-service teachers. And really the projects that utilize direct service, which should be no shock to anyone, had the greatest impact. And specifically with the young children, we saw a greater retention or a greater application in the content, the academic objectives, as well as the social objectives, especially in their ability or their especially with the skill and the skill of compassion and help. How helpful were you in this project? What did you do in order to be helpful? And those of you that work with young children know that they want to help all the time, mostly. So really service learning is a great connection. But what we found over the years is that indirect service, while really fantastic, didn't give you quite the bang for your buck as direct service. So when we had students that wanted to do letters to the troops or letters to farmers, then we really pushed them to make it as direct as possible. So they invited soldiers in, they invited farmers in. As all of you know, it's hard to go anywhere in schools now because of the budget cuts. You just don't take field trips as often. So, but most of them, we found that really everybody is excited to come in and talk about what they do, especially if there's some form of helping involved, you helping the students understand their ability to help. And so we don't care where you start, really. We just say start service learning, whether it's advocacy, indirect, or indirect. Just get out there and give it a go. So we do want to talk about that the 5 stages of service learning as outlined by NYLC really do and are applicable to young children as well. You know, we hear from, actually not so much early childhood teachers, but maybe from high school teachers who say, well, can young children really critically think and analyze like we expect them to in service learning? And we say yes. You know, even toddlers will figure out that they can pull a chair over to the counter, get on the chair, get on the counter, step on the bottom of piece of the cupboard to get the cookie in the top. Those are critical thinking skills. Little children, 2- and 3-year-olds, are doing it. And service learning is very, very applicable to critical thinking skills, starting really at age 3. We want our kids to be thinking this way. It's important. It's important. So for those of you that have been working in service learning, can you tell us a little bit about some of the projects that you've done? Not just us, can you tell the community a little bit about some of the projects that you've done using the chat box. Well, we might have some shy people. So, okay. Helping farmers planting and
harvesting. Yeah, I got one here, helping local farms with planting. Yeah.
Parent reading night, that is a super one, and that's a great way to really connect to parents. Recycling is a biggie, and it is applicable to any grade. And I'll tell you what, if you do recycling in your classroom, you will not have a cleaner classroom. Those kids will pick up and save every little itty-bitty piece of paper. The cleanest classrooms are ones that have focused on recycling. It's pretty amazing. We see some, I think it could be tutoring or kind of cross-grade level connections, which are terrific. Semester of service in middle school. I wonder if did they choose what they do? Is there lots of reading, service learning, which is terrific. And lots of environmental. You will find that many service learning activities really do lend themselves more to science, or science at first, and that's because we think of science as a hands-on kind of activity. So if you're a constructivist teacher or you have a constructivist program, specifically in the area of science, there's a really good connection there. Eva?
Yeah, and looking at these examples, I see, Save the Manatee, doing some stuff in the local hospital, the connecting EC students to pre-K classrooms. These are all wonderful projects, and the challenge teachers face and we face as teacher educators then is persuading the administrators, school administrators, that it's something it's worth taking the time to engage students in these projects that often involve them going off campus and so on, and especially since there's so much focus on student achievement, and so that's why we've gone to put a lot of effort into showing how we manage to do the project and at the same time link it to the academic standards. And in the examples that we've included in the text, we've actually tagged all of the sample lesson plans to the Common Core standards. In the slide of the Sunshine in the Pot, you can see how this one simple project addressed several curriculum areas, including math and science, where the kids would ask questions and use their senses to observe and explore materials, natural phenomena. So in the kindergarten classroom, a lot of the science focuses on the process skills, observation, sorting, classifying, that kind of thing. It's focusing on expressive arts and using media resources, health and safety, and then we had some focus on social studies, some focus on motor development as well as emergent literacy, all through one project. And what we're trying to show through the text and what we've seen in the classroom is that it's not just an add-on or something that we do at the end of the semester, that it's something that really strengthens the learning experience in the classroom. And we're probably going to say this more than once this afternoon, but it's something that we really want to emphasize. Here's a sample of the writing of one kindergarten student who had been reflecting on the recycling project. And He's written, it's important to throw bottles and cans in the recycle bin. Recycling protects our environment. So we've had this student dictate the sentence, and the teacher's written the sentence down, and then the students copied the writing underneath. In the next slide, this is where using the same example of recycling, where instead of just sticking the recycling bin in the classroom, they've actually used some of those materials then in an arts project. In thinking about service learning with young children, and when we first started working here, I guess we were all novices, and in trying to put together the text and put together materials for teacher educators to work with pre-service teachers and even for in-service teachers, we realized that people are at different levels, and so we've tried to organize the planning tools and resources based on different people's levels, whether you're a novice or an intermediate, or would you consider yourself advanced in terms of using service learning in early childhood. I can see we have some 2 or 3 novices and some at the intermediate level.
So when Isel and I became better prepared and more knowledgeable about service learning, and we're really starting to work with the teachers that our pre-service teachers interned with, we found that their questions were sort of grouped. So when we thought about the book, we really tried to make a menu option. And we have to say, since the short time that our book has been published, this section has been, we've received the most feedback from this section. And really, one of the things that we say, that we heard from Joe Fulman, who was the director of Florida Learn and Serve, was that you should think about service learning and not want to be Athena, who was born full grown and in armor. You just need to think of yourself as a service learning infant and just take little baby steps. It's okay to not know what's going to happen, and it's okay to learn with the kids and take risks. So that's part of the beauty of service learning. However, I do know that most teachers tend to be a little more controlling. Most teachers that are like me tend to be a little more that way. So it can be more difficult to have that unknown factor, but it's still worth it. It's still worth it. So we think about service learning with teacher educators in 3 different ways. The first is that you are a novice. You don't know what service learning is. Maybe you never even heard of the term service learning, but you like the idea of connecting with the community, connecting social and academic skills, and you really want to give it a try. But what do you do? So this menu gives you 2 options. You can use the service learning lesson plans in the book, of which there are a plethora of service learning lesson plans in the book that are grouped by themes. Many of the themes you've already mentioned, like environmental, literacy, those types of themes. And then we provide a step-by-step guide for you. So when you go to planning, here are different ways you can plan depending on what that project is. And we guide you through and scaffold you step by step. The other option B is to really look at your own curriculum. What is it that I'm teaching? What is it that I'm already doing that really lends itself to service learning? If you already use cross-grade tutoring, then that might be a great place to start with service learning to really kind of bump it up. So use what's in the book, use your own curriculum, or certainly you can use your own curriculum and find a corresponding lesson in the book. So it's really just open. And again, we're just looking at how to guide you in your acquisition of becoming better at service learning. We also tell teachers who are novice at service learning is to keep as much control as you want. We know that NYLC and really the service learning standards focus on student voice. Oftentimes with young children, because they have limited access to needs in the community, they don't know what they are. So it's okay for you to present two needs, and two needs that you know you have the resources for, or that you know something about. So keep as much control as you need at the beginning, and then the more you know about service learning, the more you'll start to really include those kids in that process. But it's okay to be controlling at the beginning. So we have an example here of a preschool service learning project, and it actually corresponds with the where you saw the children giving the plant to the worker. It's a DHS agent that shares their office building. So in this building there's DHS, and then there's a Head Start program. So they wanted to really form bonds with their working living community. So they grew these pots of plants to give away to share with their, well, they're not their coworkers, but to share with the people that work and participate in the same building. But we also see that the scaffolding here is pretty explicit, and that's okay. One, we're working with preschoolers who need the visual cues, but also the teacher needed a little bit more control because this was the first time the kids had ever engaged in service learning. And here we see the children following those same directions at the table where they're decorating the pot. And again, the focus is not on the pot and the growing. The focus is on how does this pot with the grass help and foster friendships and bonds with others in our community. So we have to keep coming back around to that focus. So we have the novice group, and then we have the intermediate group. So we had a lot of intermediate group checks here. And what we found is working with intermediate people, or intermediate service learning educators, is that they usually had one of 4 areas that they wanted to improve. One of the first areas was in curriculum planning. So many teachers who had done service learning realized, yeah, this is a really viable option to teach the content. It's not something else. So once they made that paradigm shift that I could really use this as a teaching strategy, then they really wanted to focus on how can I defend or prove or make sure that my principal knows that through these projects, these standards, these objectives are clearly being taught. So one of the ways intermediate service learning educators, or one area that they want to really focus on is that curriculum and planning connection, not only for themselves but also for the larger educational community. So the second connection is really reaching out to a community partner. And Ethel and I spent at least 2 years before we really formalized a community partner at FSU, because we didn't know enough to have a real firm community partner. We didn't really know how it was going to look in our program. We were shifting and changing all the time. So it took several years for us before we really connected to the Big Bend Homeless Coalition. And that organization became our community partner. And then our students worked with the BBHC to help them identify community needs that involved direct service. FSU, as many universities, it's a very in teacher education, it's a very white, middle class, upper class university. And many of our students, almost all women, really wanted to help, but they didn't really want to actually talk to the homeless people because they were scared. They had never had that experience. So what they really learned through working with the BBHC and having to actually interact with people who are homeless was that they realized so many of them are just like them. 37% of homeless people in Tallahassee have a college degree. They met nurses, they met teachers, they met families. So it was really eye-opening, that big shift that just because you're homeless, they equated homeless with street people. And they can be the same, but they don't have to. Big Bend Homeless Coalition is a huge organization and outreach. So they were really instrumental in helping us tailor what direct service would look like for our students. And they knew the community needs better than we did. So we really relied on them as our partners. But like I said, it took several years for us to get to that point. So it's okay. The other two areas that we hear teachers talk about the most are implementing reflection. How do we do it? How often do we do it? What does it look like for young kids? For those of you that work with young children, you know it's vastly different. Young kids, they are emergent readers. They're emergent writers. So you don't have them write a paragraph or read long passages because they're just learning how to do it. So you have to have other ways. And we found that this was the area that really caught us the most off guard and that we had the most trouble finding resources with. Because we would find K-6 and K-12 service learning books, but they all were heavily focused on reading and writing reflections. And that's just not appropriate for young children. So what does it look like? Draw it, act it out. Just tell us in your words, put it on a recording, videotape yourself doing something, are really more viable options for reflection and documentation than specifically reading and writing. And the last way that we've heard teachers talk about was making documentation work, so that pay it forward principles. So in our book, we kind of look at each of these four areas. If this is the area that you want to move forward with, then what are some resources and ways that you can do that? It's not exhaustive, but it's a great start. And like I said, we've received such great feedback on this. So we hope that will help you as well. Our last area that we've outlined in the book is the advanced service learning. And I thought it was very interesting that nobody tagged themselves advanced service learning when we asked you to tell us if you were novel, intermediate, or advanced. And over the years we've been doing service learning, I can tell you I've met one person that I think would consider herself advanced service learning. And as someone mentioned in the chat box that they've been doing service learning with, I think it was Marilyn, she's been doing service learning with her kids for over 30 years before they called it service learning. You are kin to this woman that we knew in Tallahassee who was a kindergarten teacher. She was a master at service learning, even, like I said, before they called it service learning. And she had been at that school for so long and as a kindergarten teacher, the first graders would come back and want to keep helping. The second graders would come back and want to keep helping. That's the only school that we've worked with that had a school-wide identified service learning focus. And really it was because of this one teacher. She was definitely advanced. So as an advanced level thinker, are there other teachers that you want to involve? Can you invite them into your classroom? Or as I'm doing here in Oklahoma and as Ethel does, we go into the schools and we work with teachers who are interested. So we kind of become that mentor. Developing a school-wide service learning focus is a great idea. We know transportation issues and school hour issues, they're all problems. So, but sometimes you have more of a walking school. So it really just depends on what your situation is. We've also had principals who have allowed service learning groups to meet during the day, modifying lunch hours so those classrooms that are interested have the same lunchtime, even if they're first grade and fifth grade. So really kind of working to make some common time during the day is another way we've had principals really focus on and promote service learning. And like I said, if you are a walking school, then oftentimes after-school service learning, works well. Or connecting with an after-school program. There are several of you, I was looking at the chat box, that work with after-school service learning. So connecting some some focus of the school day with the after school is another great tool. So we're interested to know, how confident do you feel in implementing service learning in your setting, whether that be a teacher education setting or a classroom setting? Well, this is a great spread. Because we had a lot of people say they were novice, I kind of expected more to just a little bit. But the intermediates for sure, somewhat to very, that would make sense. So what we have talked about so far is really part one of the book, and I'm sure you've noticed, because I forgot to say it at the beginning, we've tried to list the page numbers in black, either up in the top right corner that correspond with the book, or in the parts that are coming, we'll just tell you what pages they are. So that was part one of the book, really focusing on what is service learning, how to do it with young kids, why you should do it with young kids. And now Ethel's going to take us into part two of our book.
Okay, thanks, Vicki. So in part two, what we put together really was a whole bunch of resources that hopefully would help teachers, in-service and pre-service teachers get started and continue with their service projects. And these are all tools and forms that a lot of our students have used successfully in the classroom. So in Chapter 5, we've got all of the planning forms, and then Chapter 6, the community partner forms, and then some tools and resources for reflection and documentation. And then finally, we haven't talked a whole lot about this, but the assessment and evaluation forms. So it's there's probably more than you need for one project, but there's something for everybody in there. So for example, the evaluation and assessment, we have a couple of tools here. This one here that you'll see on the left of your screen, that's an easy instrument for young kids to use. I know how to stay safe if a hurricane is coming, and we have the three smiley faces for the kids to shade in. And then on the right-hand side, a service learning portrait assessment. What was easy for me, I was good at. So it's really a sort of a self-reflection tool for the student. And so this part of the project is an important piece. The evaluation, as it ties into that reflection, it's putting students in a position of having to really think about the meaning of the activity. And then for the lesson plans, so you have all the tools in one section, the templates and forms that actually we've included them in a CD as well, so that they're easy to copy. And then in the part 3, we've we put together a series of lesson plans around these 4 themes, and these are actual plans that our students used in the classroom. Except we pulled them together under these 4 themes: the letter writing projects, the gardening projects, the helping others, and environmental concerns. I noticed a couple of you had put in your chat box there that you'd worked on some letter writing projects and environmental projects. And we've also tried to cover from pre-K to 3rd grade, and then for the K3, they're all tagged with the Common Core state standards because certainly it's here in Florida, and this is something all our teachers are expected to do, is to link the activity, link the lesson plan to the Common Core or the state standards. So, for example, the school trash and pollution lesson plan, it's got the usual piece, except that it's got the purpose and the need, and then it's linking to the different standards. Here we see the Head Start framework, literacy, early writing, and then the Florida pre-K performance standards, and then the Common Core standards, and then we've got the resources and so on. And this is just one lesson, and it's really a sort of generic lesson that can be adapted for any of the grade levels in pre-K to third grade. And let me just add also, we haven't talked a lot about developmentally appropriate practices, but we see service learning as really sort of the elements of good practice as defined by the Early Childhood Association, the NUIC, developmentally appropriate practices. And the example I often use is that if you do a cute activity in your classroom, such as you take the flower pots and you paint it with pretty colors, and a lot of times we think of cute activities and we get on with it in the classroom and then we leave it. It's done and it was beneficial because it's hands-on, and we often think of hands-on. I think the difference when you layer onto it the service learning piece, it takes on a whole new meaning because you've now taken the brightly colored flower pots, you've got the planted the seeds in it and the plant's grown, and now you take it and give it to somebody else. You take it to the elderly or to someone in the community, and the child actually delivers that in person. Then it adds a whole new meaning to the activity, and it's really it's almost like the term we use in science learning in early childhood. It's hands-on and minds-on, and in this case, it's also the reflection, is because when they leave that activity, when they go back to the classroom, then they have something to talk about and share with each other, and also it gives them some content then for their writing and their reflection, whether it's through the drawing or dictating and sharing with others. So this is the other part of the lesson plan. We've got the academic objectives. Students are going to identify different types of pollution, discuss harmful effects of pollution, and so on. And then we've got the graphing for the pre-K, K1 and 2 and 3. And then we have social objectives, and then the activities defined in there. And we have, as I said, we have all of these covering all of the 4 different themes. I'm not going to go through all of them right now, but it's also lined up with the pieces we talked about that are important for service learning: the reflection piece, the documentation, and then the last part is the celebration. And you can recall the photo I showed of the kids collecting trash in the schoolyard, and this is the celebration, the dessert recipe. They were able to bring in a celebration in the classroom as part of that event. So the last part we will be talking about, and I know some of you are teacher educators. I see that Doug is with us from Atlanta and in Kennesaw, and I see some others that are teacher educators. And so we, as teacher educators, this piece was important to us because because of the nature of our work, and we wanted to include that in the text of how this activity supports research and teacher education.
So the first part of the book really you can use if you are a teacher in the classroom. You can take it and go and implement it right in your classroom. And really the second half of the book is really focusing more on, if you are a teacher educator, then how can you use the same book in your class? So we have people using it as a text in their service learning courses. We have administrators using it, so there's just many different ways. We do want you to know that, as you can tell, we are of a constructivist philosophy, and so we really look at who are the theorists that support service learning and why do these theories lend themselves to the practice of service learning. And so we have John Dewey, Jean Piaget, and Lev Vygotsky that are really those theorists that we would know in education. So if you're in teacher education, you know these three big guys. The blue theorists, you may or may not know, they're really the ones that focus more on the social and emotional environment. So we have Kohlberg and Gilligan and Wiggins, now Noddings, who developed the theory of the ethic of care. We have Thomas Lacona, who has the Center for the 4th and 5th R's, responsibility and respect, up in he's in one of the SUNY schools. But he's huge, huge, huge in character education with the connection to service learning. So we really talk about these theorists and why they support and undergird what we do in service learning. We also really believe in the pay it forward. How are you providing or how are you documenting service learning to other teacher educators? And this is a picture of our pre-service teachers at the CERT National Service Learning Conference in Long Beach. For many years, we took our pre-service teachers who were engaged in service learning and they presented at this conference. And what we found is that there weren't very many sessions at all on early childhood service learning. There still aren't very many sessions on early childhood service learning. So we're really hoping that many more of you that are here today and that are involved in early childhood or even elementary service learning, that maybe we can be a bigger force in Denver in the spring. So having our teachers teach others, our pre-service teachers teach others about service learning. And so in doing that, they see really others want to know, and they see that what they're doing is really good and appropriate practice. So in the focus on teacher education, we really talk about that teacher empowerment, which was really the picture is a great example of that, isn't it? So teacher empowerment, how are you empowered through the use of service learning? We outline the rationales for including service learning in teacher education programs, whether it's in-service training or training at pre-service teacher training at a university. We talk about the principles of good practice, specifically of the service learning and teacher education, that connection. And then we provide different pre-service teachers forms and templates to use with the reflection of service learning. There were actually more of the pre-service teacher forms out there than any of the other types that we had to create, but still we had to really focus, modify them for service learning. For early childhood. So some of the conclusions over the years is that we have found when we talk with early childhood teachers, and we hear this all the time, which is why I'm laughing, because it's exactly what Ethel and I said at that first lunch when we were introduced to service learning, is that we are already doing that. We are already doing so many of the things that are components of service learning. And really, it was the reflection and the documentation that were the pieces in the classroom that we really needed to change, and also the connection, identifying that community need. But we were already working with groups. We were already focusing on social skills. We were already doing minds-on, hands-on activities. So the leap to service learning wasn't that great. We just had to add a few more components. We also found, and our teachers tell us that, yeah, it is a viable strategy for teaching the content, and it's teaching the academic and social standards. It's not something else. But it usually takes a while before, as teachers, it usually takes for someone to be kind of an intermediate service learning teacher before they really realize that, because it's just too much. So that's okay to think of it as something else at first, because we know that you'll get there. You'll get there and start integrating it and seeing that it really is a viable teaching methodology for you in your classroom. The really, really unexpected thing that we found actually is the last three bullets, is that teachers, and this is specifically in the state of Florida, and the county that we worked with became very direct instruction for classrooms of young children. And those of us in the early childhood field, we often talk about the push-down curriculum. So, you know, first grade now looks like kindergarten, and kindergarten now looks like pre-K programs. So we're seeing a lot more intermediate grade style of teaching in classrooms for young children, which is really not what our organization would call developmentally appropriate. But what our teachers have done who have embraced service learning, not all of them, but some, is that they have identified themselves as a service learning classroom. And because service learning has such great PR with parents and the administration and the community at large, they are able to implement more appropriate practices than if they were not identified as a service learning classroom. So we have teachers who are doing many service learning projects because it's the way for them to use developmentally appropriate practices in their classroom and not butt heads so much with their administration. And they're doing good service learning. They're including all of the pieces. But if you're doing all the pieces, then you're doing really good teaching. So that's been probably our most surprising, the most surprising finding from all the years that we've been working with teachers and collecting data. So as we close today, we just would like to take any of your questions. We'll stay as long as you like to answer any questions via the chat box. And for those of you that need to go, we really appreciate you being here and joining us this afternoon. And we'd also like to tell you that Lana and Marcus, thank you to them, would also like to get some feedback from the presentation. So if you would jot off an email to Lana, her email address is here, and just tell her what information you gained from us and from the presentation, then I think she's going to do a drawing for a book. So we really hope that you enjoyed the presentation today, and we are happy to take your questions via the chat box. Thank you, Doug, for your comment.
Thanks, Julie.
And Vicki and Isal, we just want to thank you to your awesome presenters, and this will be great for those who are able to attend, and also as a recorded webinar. Just to remind everybody, you'll be able to access today's presentation, either just a slide copy or also the recorded video through the Generator School Network. I did post a link to that. But we just really thank you so much for presenting today. It was a fabulous webinar. I'm just reopening our first slide that has our Facebook and Twitter. We were asked to do that. There you go. We have more pictures of some of the service learning projects that my students here at the University of Oklahoma have done up on our Facebook page. One of them is a parent literacy one. I know several of you mentioned that that was your area. I'm going to cruise back to the last page now for Lana's email address. And I love the lips, Carrie. Thank you back. I don't know how you did it, but I want to figure out how to do that.
Alana, I see that you put the reminder in there about the Service Learning Conference. The deadline's coming up for proposals. Is it September?
September 21st.
Okay. Did we put one in?
We are going to.
Okay. All right.
Make sure that you put in a workshop proposal. It's going to be tough this year because we're not going to have as many workshops, so make sure that you get it in soon and you really look through it too.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you, Vicki and Ethel, again. It was amazing, and anybody can send questions directly to you or through the Generated School Network again.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wow, I think it's almost just us now.
Yeah. Hey, Vicki, was that your phone going in the middle of the webinar?
Yes, it was, and I want you to know.